Okay, fallacies of presumption. So now we are going to section 3.4, and you remember fallacies of presumption. This is a name that Hurley gives for family resemblance group. So far we've talked about fallacies of relevance. You remember the reasons for accepting the conclusion had nothing to do with logical reasons. It was pity, psychology, fear, stuff like that. Fallacies of weak induction, which was 3.3, this was dealing with the fact that there was not insufficient reasons for the stated conclusion. Now, fallacies of presumption, the difference here is that with these kind of arguments, there's a fallacy because in every one it's presumed that the premises are adequate. Okay, there's a presumption that everything you need is there, nothing has been left out. But when you read these arguments, you're very tempted to say, you know what, I think you've left something out in terms of reasons that you need. Okay, basically what you're doing is you've left reasons out or premises out that need to be there. Okay, so let's go to begging the question fallacy. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just give you 2 examples. The book gives you 3. But I'm only going to make you responsible for these 2, and I want you to just go with my explanation. Hurley explains things a little differently. He labels some things differently that are not typical for most logic books. So go with my explanation here, and my labeling of arguing in a circle is a little different than Hurley's. So, okay, I'm going to use the more typical. So anyway, go with my explanation, don't go with Hurley's, and there's about 2 or 3 pages he talks about this. You're probably going to find my explanation a little more clear and simple. Okay, so begging the question, you're reading some argument and it begs the question, I think you've left something out. You need to put a premise here, and think of it this way, if someone leaves a premise out, often it's because it's shaky, or another way of looking at this is sometimes they don't even have enough reason there. So sometimes it's a shaky premise, that's why they left it out, or they're not really leaving something out intentionally. They just don't really have good enough reasons there. And this first one kind of is like that. When you argue in a circle, once you understand what this is, it begs the question, you know what, can we have some reasons? Because what you've given me here are not reasons. Okay, and you'll understand that with arguing in a circle in a minute, why it's put under begging the question type of fallacy. Okay, let me read this. Arguing in a circle, you're assuming the point to be proved. The premises are similar in content to the conclusion, but they're not better known than the conclusion. And really what's going on is the conclusion merely restates a possible false premise in slightly different language. The premise supports the conclusion, and the conclusion tends to reinforce the premise. Look at it this way. If you use as a premise what you're trying to prove, you can already see there's a problem with that. If you're trying to argue for a certain conclusion, you don't put that conclusion as one of the reasons because you haven't really demonstrated it yet. Once you demonstrate a conclusion, then later on you can use it as a premise. But if you're trying to argue for the conclusion, you can't have the conclusion as one of the premises. So what you're doing is you're assuming the very thing you're trying to prove, so it's kind of in a circle. Here's the conclusion down here. You don't have that same conclusion, just reworded up as one of the premises. So that's why they say you're arguing in a circle. Okay? Now this is interesting. A lot of times you could be looking at an argument that is committing arguing in a circle fallacy and not even know it, because often the premise is appearing as the conclusion is appearing as one of the premises, but it's reworded that it's hidden or it's in disguise. Okay? And the reason they call this begging the question is, if they're doing that, because really all that arguing in the circle is, here's your conclusion down here. We'll call it conclusion 1. Your reason is the conclusion reworded. So really this is like you're just repeating the conclusion. And that's not an argument. Remember, an argument has to have reasons, and then those reasons, secondly, the second part of an argument, has to imply the conclusion. But here, if you just write the conclusion down twice, it doesn't even meet the criteria for an argument, okay? And the reason it begs the question is, you would say to someone, look, I've looked at your argument, and all you've done is write down the conclusion twice in different ways, so you really haven't given any reasons, so I need something else other than you writing down the conclusion more than once to establish your conclusion. We need some reasons. Okay, so let's go to I have two examples here. Here's one here. Capital punishment is justified for the crimes of murder and kidnapping because it is quite legitimate and appropriate that someone be put to death for having committed such hateful and inhuman acts. Now you could look at that and go, oh, okay, here's the premise. Remember, because is an indicator word, and the premise follows. So it looks like it's got one premise, and then over here is the conclusion. But really what you're saying is, because it's quite legitimate and appropriate that someone be put to death for having committed such hateful and inhuman acts, therefore capital punishment is justified for the crimes of murder and kidnapping. Can you see how it's arguing in a circle? You may not notice this because the conclusion is written down twice, but it's reworded so it's in disguise. Okay, you want to be on the lookout for that. And this begs the question. You remember, if you just write down the conclusion more than once, it's going to beg the question. The question's always going to revolve around, you still haven't given me any reasons that capital punishment is legitimate and appropriate for these crimes. You're just stating that it is. Okay? Let's go to another one. Anyone who preaches revolution has a vision of the future. For the simple reason, so right here, for the simple reason, that means a premise is following, right? If a person has no vision of the future, he could not possibly preach revolution. Therefore, anybody who preaches revolution of the future, has a vision of the future, all you've done is put down the conclusion more than once. It's not an argument. No wonder it begs the question, well, how do you know that people who preach revolution do have a vision of the future? There's no reasons here for something like that. It's just stating the conclusion twice. Okay, so under begging the question, the first example is arguing in a circle. Let's go to the second one here. We'll bring this down. And I'll extend the page just a little bit here. Okay, let's go back up to the first what this is here. You can be begging the question if you leave out a shaky or false premise or leave something out, okay? So you're looking at reasoning and you can tell, you know what, you need another premise here. Often people leave out those premises because they are shaky or controversial. Sometimes maybe not, they just left it out. So these arguments create the impression that nothing more is needed to establish the conclusion, but after you hear their reasoning, you're very tempted and prompted to say, you know what, I think you left something out of the premises. We need another premise. The original argument is missing a premise, okay? So here's some examples here. Of course, humans and apes evolved from a common ancestor. Just look how similar they are. So this is really premise one. Human and apes are similar, therefore they have a common ancestor. But this is begging the question, does the mere fact that human and apes look similar imply that they evolved from a common ancestor? Like, you need a premise that says there are never any two organisms with similar structures that have different ancestry, something like that. So let me write this down and you can kind of see what I'm meaning with this first example. Okay, let's say we wrote down premise one, humans and apes have similar morphology, have similar morphology. Okay, that's premise one. And it really does need another premise. We'll leave that blank for right now. And you're going to conclude, therefore, humans and apes, and these three dots mean therefore. Therefore, humans and apes have a common ancestry. Have a common ancestry. Okay, here there's a premise left out. You have to have something else in there, and it's going to be kind of shaky. It's probably why they left it out, but it really needs a premise like this. Similar morphology only occurs with organisms with known common ancestry. Okay? So, human and apes have similar morphology. Similar morphology only occurs with organisms with known common ancestry. For example, we have never found two organisms, and we know their ancestry is different, that ever have common morphology. You know, that'd be another way of saying it. Therefore, human and apes have a common ancestry. So this would be complete, but this one here was left out. And because it's controversial, what if you get someone, and you've got to remember with evolution and intelligent design, the theory of evolution has never ever enjoyed a consensus. Okay? There's always been people who have questioned it. You have a lot of people that believe in it, and you've always had many people that haven't. So here, someone who's a critic of evolution might say, look, I happen to believe that natural selection and mutation can't accomplish all of this morphology. What if you had a God, and since he made all these different creatures in the same environment, the same gravity, the same physical parameters, he gave many different organisms who don't have common ancestry an elbow joint, or that kind of morphology, even if it fulfilled a different function. He uses different, uses the same design in different organisms all over the place. Okay, so that would be why this could be shaky. Okay? So there's an example of what we mean. Really what the argument only had here, it had premise one, and then it had the conclusion, and you're knowing something has been left out, and that's something, it's begging the question, you need something like this included. Okay, so let's go to the second one. Let's go ahead and erase this here. So we'll come down here, and let's make that kind of bigger. So let's erase this. Okay, and we'll do the next one here. Come up, get my pen back. Okay, it is obvious that the poor in this country should be given handouts from the government. After all, these people earn less than the average citizen. Okay, this begs the question, just because in a society you have poor people, does this mean the government should give them money? So if we're going to write this down as it stands right now, it's obvious that the poor in this country should, so there's something moral about this being talked about. Poor should be given handouts from the government. So the first fact is, there are poor people that earn less than the average citizen. So if we were going to write this down, how about, some Americans earn less than the average American. Okay, earn less than the average American. Okay? And then 2 will be what you will see is left out. But the conclusion, and we'll do the little 3 thing again there, therefore, the government should give money out to, the poor. Okay? So what you would really need to write in here, and the reason it's called begging the question, is you're looking at this, if this is all you got, and that's really all that's up here, you need to write something in here, and what you'd have to write is something like this. Just societies ought to give out money to the poor. Okay? Now, that right here is a shaky premise. You can have a lot of people disagreeing with that. You'll have some people saying the government should not do that. It creates dependency, they'll say. As long as everybody has an equal chance of getting money, then the fact that you have circles of income of different sizes, that doesn't mean things are unjust at all. We live in a meritocracy, and someone could have more money because they worked more hours or they took a greater risk. So this is so controversial that maybe that's why it was left out. Okay, so but it begs this question: shouldn't you have something like this? And then you at least have an argument. Some Americans earn less than the average American. Just societies will or ought to give out money to the poor, so therefore the government should give out money to the poor. Okay? And then if we were going to go to this one here, I won't draw this one out. This begs the question too. First of all, it's saying, you know, terminally ill patients have a right to doctor-assisted suicide. Right? After all, many of these people are unable to commit suicide by themselves. But this begs the question, just because terminally ill patients can't commit suicide, does it follow that they have a right to doctor's assistance? So if we were going to write this out, and you know what, let's just go ahead and do that. More examples help. So we'll X this one out here. Okay, there we go. So let's go ahead and write this one out. Get our pen back. Okay, 1. Let's see. Many patients, that would be premise 1. Many patients can't commit suicide by themselves. Okay, and then it's begging a question because we suspect something's been left out, right? Okay, and then the conclusion is terminally ill patients have a right to doctor-assisted suicide. Okay, I'll abbreviate that. All right, because that's what it's saying here is we have many patients, they can't commit suicide by themselves. That's premise. That's the only premise they've given. Therefore, these patients have a right to doctor-assisted suicide. But it's begging the question about one premise, and this one premise should be something like that, something like this. Doctors are to assist patients with all serious requests. Okay, there's a request there. And this certainly is contentious. Should doctors assist patients with any request? You know, if you came up to me and said, "Hey Dave, can you go get me a hamburger?" Sure. What if you came up to me and said, "Hey Dave, can you help me kill myself?" Can you see how the magnitude of that request is far different, and you're going to get a truckload of people saying, "No, I cannot. I do not want to be involved in that." So it begs this question. A shaky premise has been left out. Okay, these are the first two, and we'll end this video, part 1, fallacies of presumption, and we'll do section 3, 4, fallacies of presumption, part 2, and do the next, I think there's 3 more fallacies of presumption, something like that. So I'll see you in a minute.